Yeah, your Bibles, please open up to Matthew chapter 9. That's where we're going to park it this morning. And real quick, before we get started, just want to thank all of the men this morning for taking the time out of their busy morning to participate and serve this congregation, whether that's with prayer, leading songs, serving on the Lord's table, and also those of you who have prepared the Lord's Supper this morning. Thank you so much for that. We are kind of in a transition. We had just finished a series in the book of Acts called Multiply. And next week we're going to be starting another sermon series, mostly out of the book of Ephesians, called The Greatness of the Church. So just kind of plug in for next week and a couple weeks to follow. If you are here this morning and you're kind of not so sure about what this all means about the church and how the church is connected to Jesus, and maybe you're someone that says, man, I'd really like to know more about how the church is connected to Jesus, or maybe you just don't even have a religious background at all, and you're just like here this morning because someone said there's going to be food, I don't know, and they brought you here, and you're just like, man, these people, these are kind of weird people. You know, that sermon series is absolutely, positively for you. So starting next week, we're going to start a sermon series on the greatness of the church. And one of the things that I've always noticed, just from the time where I was 16 up until now, really there are four categories in which everybody falls into when it comes to religious history. Everybody in here this morning has a religious history. So what do I mean by that? Okay, well, there are really four categories. One is you don't even have a religious history. You might be here this morning with a friend or a family member because you got the invitation and you wanted to be with your family, but you really don't have a religious history. You've never been to church. You've never experienced a religious service. You're not really sure about who this Jesus guy is, what this whole church thing is all about. And as we look at the landscape of America, there's a Pew Research poll that just came out probably 2 or 3 days ago that showed that the largest religious group on the rise is actually the group called nuns. Those people, not nuns as in the Catholic Church nuns, but the nuns that have no religious affiliation whatsoever. And so that is their religious history. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum are those of us who have always been in the church. Those of us who have always gone to church. That you have been coming to church, coming and going from church from the time that you were knee-high to a grasshopper till now. And so that's kind of the spectrum. No religious history and faithfully going to church day in, day out from the time in which you were young. And then there's kind of two middle categories. The first middle category is the group of people who grew up in church. They went to church as a young person and they got burned. They got burned by the church. And so they were like, man, it seems like in my religious walk, in my walk with Jesus, my walk with God, it just kind of seems like there's just this big game of playing do and don't do. And there's no really relationship with Jesus, and so it's rule. And if you break that rule, then you're kind of out. And so they grew up in that, and so once they got a chance to get away from that, whether that be college, a young adult, they got out and said, hey, I've done a lot of things in my life that would consider me out, so I'm just going to stay out. Right? That's a group there. And then there's another group where they grew up in the church. They really didn't get burned by the church. They just kind of got away from the church. They got away from God when they went to college. They became a young adult, and their life just got really busy, is what they would say. And so they just kind of got away and moved away from God, moved away from the church. But then a life event happened. Whether they got married, they had the birth of a son or a daughter, or maybe the opposite happened. Maybe they lost somebody in their life. Maybe they lost a family member, a relative, a son or a daughter. And so it caused them to see that, hey, life is short, and I want to reconnect with God. And so those are really the four categories. And all of us in here knows either a brother, a sister, a father, a mother, a friend, a coworker, a classmate who falls into this category, and some of us, and every single one of us in here this morning, falls into one of those four categories. And so what is interesting about this text this morning is each one of those groups asks a question. Each one of them asks a question. If you're not religious and you're here this morning, you're asking the question, okay, what is this Jesus guy all about? What is he? I'm a non-believer. I don't really. Jesus seems like he was a good guy, but what does he want from me? Right? What does he want? What does he offer me? And that's the question that the religious people ask as well. You're here this morning. If you've been faithful to the church, if you've been coming to church, if you had an active relationship with God, you're here this morning and you're wanting to know, what is God going to provide for me this morning in the text that causes my relationship with Him to grow closer, but also is going to help me evangelize people in the dark. That should be your goal. That should be your thought process. And then for the people kind of in the middle, your question, you're saying, okay, how do I reconnect with God? How do I reconnect with Jesus? The great thing about this text this morning is it answers all of those questions. And it answers those questions with two words. You're probably sitting there, there's no way. You have to have this scripture that's going to be, long, and you're going to want us to remember it. And no. This morning, whether you're religious, kind of in the middle, or you've been an active follower of Jesus Christ, your questions are answered this morning with two words. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9. And so we see here Jesus has been passing through the countryside and he's been healing people, he's been teaching people. And from Matthew, really 5 to 8 is the Sermon on the Mount. And at the end of that sermon, people understand that Jesus is teaching as one with authority, not like their scribes. And so he comes, and Jesus hasn't really gotten together his inner circle yet. He hasn't really gotten his 12 apostles, his 12 disciples who are going to go and they're going to change the world, as we saw in our previous sermon series in Multiply in the book of Acts. And so it says, as Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man, you can go hit the slide, Mike, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Okay, now, so one would ask, okay, why is that important? Because the tax collector in the first century was really the outcast. The tax collector was seen as somebody who was unfair. And what happened in the first century is the Romans auctioned off the opportunity to become a tax collector. So there was like the bridge tax, there was the property tax, there was the road tax, there was the income tax, there was the crop tax. It kind of seemed like, hey, tax, you name it, they taxed it. And so their agreement with the tax collector was, you can charge whatever you want for taxes. As long as the Romans get their share, you can keep what's left over. And so what would happen is they would charge an insane amount of taxes. And they'd end up being wealthy. And the problem with that would be, for Matthew, the tax collector, he would be seen as a traitor to his own country. But not just his own country, because Matthew was a Jew. He'd be a traitor to the nation of Israel. He'd be a traitor to his family, to his friends. If he had any brothers, he'd be a traitor to them too. And he'd also, most importantly in the Jewish mindset, he would be a traitor to God. Therefore, he would be considered a sinner. He'd be considered an outcast. He'd be considered a vile person. Tax collector's booth. And so Jesus rolls up to this guy at the tax collector's booth, and notice what he says. Go ahead and slide, Mike. Notice what he says in the very next verse. It says, Matthew saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth, and he said to him, look this, it's in your text. He said to him, go, and if you're willing to go to the temple, give me your offerings, give me your life, get your life perfect, follow all the rules perfectly, and then follow me. Is that what it says in the text? not what it says in the text. He says two words. Follow me. He says, follow me. And go ahead to the next slide, Mike. He says, follow me. And he said to him, follow me. Go ahead, next one, Mike. And he rose up and he followed him. Now, you have to understand the crowd that's following Jesus. What could Jesus have said to Matthew, the tax collector? He could have said exactly what the previous slide said. He could say, hey, in order for you to be right, in order for you to come join me, you have to have your life perfect. And then come and follow me. He could have said, you are just a disgusting, vile example of a Jew, and I bet your parents are proud of you. He could have said that. But that's not what he did. See, what Jesus did is he inserted himself into the life of the tax collector, into the life of the outcast, and he said two words. Follow me. He said, follow me. And so many times, whether you're religious or whether you're irreligious or whether you're kind of in the middle, so many times what we do in our discussion and our thoughts about what it would take to follow God, so many times we make the road more narrow than God ever intended to make it. We say, well, I have to do this, or I have to do that, or I have to act this certain way, or I have to be this certain way, and all Jesus wants you to do, and all he wants me to do is follow him. See, the Pharisees were the ones who would come along to the people and say, you've got to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then you can join us. But that's not what Jesus told Matthew. Jesus essentially told Matthew, if you follow me, you will change. The Pharisees were the ones who came along and said, change and then follow us. So those are two totally different concepts, because Jesus knew that if Matthew followed him, it didn't matter that he was a tax collector. It didn't matter what he had going on in his life. He knew that if Matthew were to follow him and have a relationship with him, he would automatically change. Because that's the power of the gospel. And so maybe this morning, you're here this morning and you're saying, yeah, that just sounds a little bit too easy. And there's another group of people in the text this morning that thought that what Jesus did was a little bit too easy. I mean, wait, Jesus, time out. You understand that this guy overtaxes people? Jesus would say, so? Wait, Jesus, time out. Don't you understand that this guy is a traitor to his family? Jesus would say, so? Wait, Jesus, time out, hold up. Don't you understand that he's betrayed and he's left God for the pagans, for the world? And Jesus would say, so? Okay, so what are you saying, Jesus? Follow me. Two words is all that he said. And so we look at this section, and it said, and if you thought that was bad, if they thought that Jesus telling this guy to follow him was bad, check out the next verse. Go ahead, hit the slide line. And it said, actually go back. And he said, in verse 10 it said, and Jesus reclined at the table in the house. Behold, it says there, what's the word? Behold. Verse 10, many tax collectors, right? Many tax collectors and what? Sinners. So tax collectors were so bad, they had their own category. Right? It wasn't enough just to call them sinners. They had their own category. It was like the tax collectors and the sinners. Right? So you got the lowest of the low, and Jesus is not just with one tax collector at one booth, he's with many tax collectors, many sinners in a house. You guys thought that was offensive there, and the Pharisees come along and they ask his disciples, it says, the Pharisees saw this and they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And so the Pharisees are all amped up or all upset and say, "Hey, well, don't you understand what you're doing? Don't you understand that these guys are like the lepers from the Old Testament that are in the law? These guys are the ones that you're not supposed to be around, because if you're around a leper, if you're around a sinner, you yourself are made impure. What in the world are you doing, Jesus?" And sometimes that's our mentality. Sometimes we believe that if we engage people who are not like us, that somehow we become impure. I don't know if you know this. I don't know if you've looked at this in the text or in the gospel accounts, but have you ever noticed that people who were nothing like Jesus Christ loved him? And that Jesus was comfortable around those people? Why else would he go into a house where there are many tax collectors and sinners? And he's asked us, I'm talking to the followers now. If you're in the four categories here, I'm talking to the followers here, the Christians. Granted, there are activities and behaviors that God does not want from his people. But that does not mean that we don't engage people who are nothing like us so that they might become like Jesus Christ. And here's the kicker. They're around you every single day. Whether you know it or not. They're around you every single day. Whether that's at your office, whether that's in your family, whether that's at school with your classmates, they're around you every single day. And sometimes we get the mentality of, oh, I can't be around them or else I'm going to be classified as a sinner. And that's exactly the way that the Pharisees thought. Because the Pharisees thought the only way in which anybody could get to God is if they were perfect. If they were perfect. And I don't know if you know this, but we're not. We're not. We're not perfect. So you have imperfect people who, if we get lost in our goal as Christians, will try and be perfect people. Imperfect people trying to be perfect people equals disaster for evangelism. But notice what Jesus says to this group of people. But when he heard it, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are" what? Sick, right? You thought it was bad enough for the Pharisees that these guys were in there with the tax collectors and sinners. How do you feel if you're a tax collector or a sinner and you hear that? Wait, Jesus, I thought you were just coming here to have a good time. I thought you just wanted to hang out a little bit. No, that's not what Jesus says. Jesus says, I'm here for those who are sick. And by proximity, hey Matthew, tax collector, it's you. Hey sinner, sit next to me in the house, it's you. And so now I want to talk, if you're here and you are on the other side of the spectrum, whether you're trying to reconnect with God, whether you've left the church, whether you don't even have a religious history. Let me talk to you for a second. You don't need me to tell you you're sick. You don't need a preacher to tell you that you're sick. You don't need an elder to tell you that you're sick. You don't don't need a deacon to tell you that you're sick. You don't need a Jesus freak to tell you that you're sick, because here's the thing. You know you are. How do I know that? Because most of us, the majority of us, maybe even all of us, don't follow our own rules. Right? That talk that you had with your son about how he's supposed to act, there are times where you don't follow that. That conversation about how you wanted your daughter to act or to dress, there's some times where you don't do that. The rules that you hand down to your employees on a daily basis, man, there are times where you kind of skirt the line and you don't follow those rules that you hand down to your employees. If you maybe live with a roommate, maybe you're in college, you just live with a roommate or something like that, and you say, hey, this is the cereal that I bought, I don't want you to eat that, that's for me. There are times where you go and you take their cereal. So you know that you're sick. You know that if the standard is Jesus, you've fallen short. You know if there's judgment, you're in trouble. So you don't need me to tell you that, because you in your everyday life seek and try to become a better person. That's why you might have a bunch of self-help books and you keep buying self-help books, because you can't get yourself right. And here's the thing, you don't need me to tell you that. I'm not being judge, jury, and executioner, but this is what you would say about yourself. And so here's the thing about that. Jesus says, I'm here for you. Well, what do you want me to do, Jesus? What do you want me to do? Okay, Matthew. Jesus told him, follow me. He said, I'm here for the sick. And then he tells them, go learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but the sinners. And so Jesus essentially says, hey, I'm not here to call those who believe that they're healthy, wealthy, and self-righteously okay. I'm not here for the self-righteous, because like the Pharisees who were self-righteous, they can't be reached because they're caught up in themselves. I'm here for the people that need healing in their life. And so this is what I know about this text, and this applies for most of us here this morning. So what does Jesus want me to do with my life? How can I reconnect with Jesus? These are for the people in the middle. Do I need to give 10%? Do I need to be at every single fellowship meal? Do I need to go on every single youth event in order to be right with Jesus? No, Jesus just said, follow me. Let's just start there. Just follow me. Okay, and what about us who are followers? What about us who do have an active, viable relationship with Jesus? What does he want me to do? Continue following. He wants us to continue following. And what that means is that he doesn't want us he doesn't want us to just focus only on the right way to believe and the right way to act. Because here's the thing about that. There are going to be times where I don't act the right way. He wants me to follow him. He wants me to follow him. Two simple words. And my prayer is that as a group here this morning, that we never be just okay. That the epitome of our relationship with Jesus is my only focus in my relationship is just to act right and just to believe right. Now, certainly we want to act the way that Jesus wants us to act, and we want to be good workmen of the Word. But what we don't want to be are people who become like Pharisees. It's not what we want to be. Every time someone walks through the doors, we ask them how they're doing. They say, "Hey, I'm struggling with something." They say, "Well, you're lost. You have no hope," because that's what the Pharisees did. We want people to walk in and they tell us their life story, and we say, "You know what Jesus wants for you? He wants the same thing for you that he wanted for Matthew. He wants you to follow him." And Jesus says, "I'll take care of the rest." And so this is what else I know about the text this morning. Being a sinner does not disqualify you from becoming a follower. It's actually a prerequisite. Because all of us sin. And Jesus said that he came for those people. And if all of us sin, then he's here this morning for me and you. Being a doubter about who Jesus is doesn't disqualify you from becoming a follower. When Jesus says, "Follow me," he's giving an invitation for relationship. He's given an invitation for a relationship. And now, if we were to survey all the married couples here, I'll go with the guys because I'm safe with the guys. So guys, I want to ask you this question. This is a rhetorical question. Those guys that are married or are dating, when you wake up in the morning, or those times where if you're dating, if you go out with your significant other, is there like a list that you bring out that says, okay, the top 10 things a good boyfriend or a top 10 things a good husband does? And you make sure you got all the checks in the box? Nope. Nobody does that, okay? Nobody has the list. I don't, because I break it all the time. So there's no list. Like top 10 things a good husband does, you check all the boxes. Or there are times where in your relationship you mess up. Right, guys, we mess up. Right, ladies, the perfect guys mess up. In our relationship we mess up, but that doesn't automatically mean that my significant other doesn't still love me. And if that's not how it works in your marriage or in your dating relationship, why would we think that that's how it works with God? Because here's the thing. I can wake up every single morning. I'm going to talk about us for a second, okay? I can wake up every single morning, get her coffee, make her breakfast, do the laundry, and pick her up from work. And there's a possibility that I could check off all the single boxes and there still be no love there. Or I can forget